Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I hope I won't make you more asleep than the lunch and the sweets that we just had. Yeah, that was a great opportunity. I mean, that's the first, I mean, this is 5 years I'm working with this organization, with the Alliance of Affordable Internet, and that's the first time that I present to a Caribbean gathering. I usually do a lot of presentations in Latin America and somewhere else, but that's the first time that I do it in a really Caribbean setup. Although many of you know me or receive my emails in the Caribbean, that's the first time I have to present this. So about me very quickly, just because I think it's relevant for me that I know the Caribbean or been around. So since '94, I started working with the first research networks in Dominican Republic and Haiti. At that time was just before the web. And at that time, in that organization I was collaborating with called Funredes. We already had, just after came the TCP/IP, the web, and the mailing list, we had already some kind of Caribbean NGO network mailing list and the Salsa mailing list with multilingual translation. And at that time, we didn't have Google Translate, so it was manual, almost translation of every email to make sure Spanish, English, French, Creole, Caribbean could exchange using this, what we at that time called new information and communication technologies. That was a long time ago. In 2002, I happened to have facilitated that roundtable that was initiated by ITU. Philip Cross at that time was leading that. And I think it was the first time we had a regional ICT policy gathering, let's say, or trying to do that. What happened that was very interesting, we did a small mailing list at that time to start that. That was, we were about 50 persons in Barbados, October 2002. And that mailing list still exists today. It's now called the Caribbean ICT Stakeholders Virtual Community Civic, and it's 600 members since 2002. So those who want to join, just ask me at the end of the session. And at that time, we remember in 2003, one of the first civic achievements was to prepare a Caribbean multi-stakeholder position to the WSIS 2003. So it was it's prehistory of the Caribbean IGF. At that time, we didn't have Caribbean IGF. In 2003, I happened to have to do a consultation for the European Union to prepare the Caribbean Information Society program. That led to the creation of the Caribbean ICT Steering Committee and the program. And at that time, we did also a workshop to define what were the priorities for the Caribbean. And those are like the prehistoric elements of for those who are going to write the book about the Caribbean governance, this is prehistory, before Caribbean IGF. So I did a lot of other regional projects as NGO, also as consultant, but this is more as NGO, the CARISNet project with the DevNet, already from Guyana. In Jamaica, it was the Sustainable Development Network with Valerie Gordon. In Haiti, it was unfortunately, we lost him, Stefan, yes, and Funredes. We already were looking at that multi-stakeholder conversation for integrated information society in the Caribbean. Also, we built the Caribbean Telecenters Network, a discussion 2006, 2007. And more recently, I'm working with the Maurice McNaughton at the UWI Mona campus, the MSB, with the Caribbean Open Institute, where we're doing things like open data research, developing the Caribbean hackathons, and now we're doing the Caribbean School of Data that has an initiative that will start soon. So that was just to understand that I've been around the Caribbean for quite some time, and we have a lot of things that I've been doing. And okay, so what is the A4AI, the Alliance for Affordable Internet? It's an alliance, meaning it's made of about 85 different organizations that includes governments, private sector, civil society, academia, and corporations, all looking at how can we make the broadband or the internet more affordable. So this is an example of those institutions. So you see we have from Google to GSMA to UN organizations to CTO, etc. All those, when they join the alliance, there are a certain number of principles that they recognize. let's say. So they endorse. And those principles of internet freedom and the rights of expression, assembly, and association online, but also a lot of other principles, and you can find on the a4ai.org page, include like what about market competition, what about the regulators' independence and accountability, what about infrastructure sharing, what about spectrum, what about user rights, what about fiscal policies. So we have a set of principles that have been agreed by members of the alliance. So the idea is today affordability is still one of the main barriers of digital inclusion. We said now ITU just said in December 50% of the population has, but that means that 50% doesn't in the world. And that was the easy to connect, those 50%. Now we get the hard to connect. Of course, access, physical access, literacy, capacity, interest, ability, and affordability, all of those together have to be in place so the people would benefit and not be excluded if they choose so of the digital benefits. One of the things that we succeeded as A4AI was to change the definition of affordability. The UN Broadband Commission until last year, until 2018, had the definition of it's an indicator. It doesn't mean everything, but it's an indicator that allows to compare. So before it was the 500 megabyte data package had to be below 5% of your average country average income, per capita income. And we changed that to 142, which means the 1 gig package to 2% of the average income. So right now, of the whole world, we monitor a lot of countries using that indicator. Only 19 countries. No, sorry. It's only 19 countries of the countries we monitor, which does not include the developed or the more developed countries. In the developing world, only 19 countries have that threshold of the ones we monitor. So A4AI is hosted at the Web Foundation, means that the kind of secretariat or support of articulation of this A4AI is at the Web Foundation. The Web Foundation was founded by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the person who invented the World Wide Web. And the Web Foundation has a lot of other projects and initiatives, research, advocacy, and innovation and technology projects. Some of their key, I mean, when I say they, it's us, but it's the Web Foundation overall victories in the last years. Some are related to net neutrality, some are related to open data and open government, some are related to the Digital Bill of Rights. And right now, as you know, it was a few months ago, the 30th anniversary of the web. Tim Berners-Lee said the web is broken, we have to fix it. So they're working on this project called A Contract for the Web. And it's supposed to be a contract that governments, citizens, and corporation companies would subscribe to. And it's being developed right now. If you go to fortheweb.webfoundation.org, you will be able to join, and there is working groups developing right now those principles or contracts for the web. So we do research. We do three things. We do research, advocacy, and country engagement. So country engagement is what motivated me to present this here today, but I'm going to go first for research. We do our main research piece is the affordability report, where we track policy progress. And we have an indicator that's called the Affordability Drivers Index. We do not measure the impact, but we measure the change in policies, because we believe that policy and regulatory change is what can drive affordability. So we have researchers in all the 60 plus countries that we measure, where they will look at very specifically if that policy is effective, if that policy in infrastructure sharing, in spectrum, if there are transparent auctions, if there is a licensing problem, if there is user rights are respected, if the regulators' decisions are being enforced, if what I don't know, there are like 100 questions in that survey, and we really look at the policies, not at the statistical numbers that will come, that they will impact a few years. So that really is an instrument that is very important for identifying good practices in terms of actual policies. And And so we have this ranking, this ADI. I mean, all this is online. The data set is available online and everything, where you can see the scores of the countries with the 3 sub-indexes, and one on access, one on infrastructure. No, 2, sorry, access and infrastructure, and then a global score. And that gives you a ranking of how the countries are doing in terms of implementing policies. We also have specific research, like on universal service and access funds, and if they are well used, if what they are used for. Our last research was targeting their use for closing the gender digital gap or gender digital divide. So it's a very specific research. We also have other tools like the mobile broadband pricing update that you can also check online, and quality of service report, where we look at the quality, not only the price, but also the quality. All the data is available online, and you can play with it and see the different countries. Unfortunately, very few countries of the Caribbean are being in this platform, but still you can find a few. And I was going to say, the affordability here you can see is per country. So you will find that certain countries are affordable, but it's always a trick that you have to look a little bit deeper. And this is one example I always like to say. Dominican Republic right now, for the country, the threshold, the 1 gigabyte mobile data is 1.43 of the average income in the country. So they would say, oh, but we are affordable, right? We have affordability in Dominican Republic. But if you go deeper, if you look deeper and you divide by income quintile, then you will see that for 60% of the population, that's not right. That's not true. So it's unaffordable for 60% of the population. So that's why sometimes you have to dig into the numbers. And if you add other variables like gender, rural, etc., then you will find it can get a lot worse. So it's always important, even if you have a number like for this affordability at national level, you have to deepen the research and look into the details of the countries, because then you will see there are a lot of gaps within the countries. And I'm sure in the Caribbean, in the other islands of the Caribbean, we have a similar situation where we have a very nice indicator at the national level, but then if you go community by community, or we will have different numbers. So we promote, based on this research, a lot of different policy action. For example, public access solutions like telecenters, community centers, open Wi-Fi spaces, etc., for those who cannot pay or cannot or can pay for something and cannot pay for other things, still to provide open or free access. We promote innovation in regulation. There is a lot of smart regulatory measures that can be done to ensure affordability. We promote innovative use of spectrum that includes spectrum sharing, dynamic spectrum, secondary markets of spectrum, things like that. And having a spectrum plan and policy on the long term, so you make sure there is enough spectrum available for deployment of broadband. We promote and we talk a lot about infrastructure sharing and resource sharing. And that's not only, as usually people think, only the towers or the ducts, but it can be also, like they do in Mexico, the roofs of the public buildings that are being used for putting towers to be shared by different operators. So there is a lot of things that can be shared if it's smart enough. We do not advocate for mandatory sharing, but we advocate for a set of incentives that makes that not sharing is a bad business decision for a telecom operator. That also include IXPs, that also include shared backhauls or shared networks, etc. So all that different, of course, every country is particular, but the idea is we can lower the cost of operating broadband networks. So at the end of the day, more people can afford being online. Effective universal funds. We have found in our research that in many countries that have universal funds, they're not used effectively or they're used for other things. I'm not saying it's the Caribbean. We haven't researched the Caribbean, but it's always good to make sure that the management and the targeting of the funds of Universal Service Fund is well done and executed. And very important that the countries have effective broadband plans with clear targets. I want to connect this region, so many households, so many businesses, so many government entities by that date with that quality of service and with that affordable target. That is the kind of plans that is difficult to get for many countries. They have very general statements and nice intentions, but when it comes to very detailed, I want so many households to have broadband connectivity, and that it's at that price maximum in that region, that becomes more complicated, because that you have to take the measures and you have to have all the things to make that possible. It's much more than just a general statement like, I want to connect everybody. How we do that? So we encourage the adoption of these affordability targets to drive down the prices and increase access. We create these national coalitions with multi-stakeholders, and that's my next slides. We improve the collection of gender and poverty disaggregated data related to internet access and use, and we advocate for these public access initiatives. Everything gender with a gender perspective, because we have a very strong gender program that I'm just going to talk about. It's about the Women Rights Online Network. We have a network of basically NGOs and research institutions all around the world that produce research. We call it the digital scorecards, and also have based on this research in all these countries, created what we call the REACT framework, which is proposed to policymakers how to address actively the digital gender gap through promoting rights, which includes, and I think this is the one that is very important for the Caribbean, it's the online gender-based violence, which is preventing a lot of good things to happen, I think, in the Caribbean. Education, access, content, and having policy targets. So I'm going very fast. All that is online, and I can provide more information, but this is called the REACT framework, which is very specific to the gender divide. So national coalitions, we have 7 countries right now, 2 in Asia, 4 in Africa, and 2 in Latin America, where we create this multi-stakeholder coalition. It sounds like, I mean, multi-stakeholders for us in the ICT field has been like a buzzword for so many years. It's complicated, it's hard, it's very, very, very time-consuming, effort-consuming to be really multi-stakeholder. I mean, really making sure that everybody, not only opening the place, opening, let's say, you can talk, no, making sure that your views are taken into account and are inserted, integrated into whatever comes out. It's very, very high. It's a lot of work. It's much easier to contract a consultant that write the same thing in 2 days than spend 6 months building a document, but making sure that everybody was in the process. It can be the same document, but the process is completely different, and the output of that process will be completely different. I think that's one thing. But one key thing is that when we start working in a country, we start with the agreement with the government. So we will sign a memorandum with the ministry or the regulator first. And the regulators has to agree that they will hear and they will be part of the process, and they will consider and they will act on the recommendations of that national coalition, multi-stakeholder coalition. So the important thing here is before we start, we know that we will have the ear. And that motivates to put in the room the telcos, the academics, the NGOs, the human rights advocates, the whatever special groups, development related to development or to ICTs, the ICT industry, to put everybody, because they know that whatever comes out will be considered and hopefully adopted and implemented by the government or the policymakers. So that's very important. So the first thing that we do is we create these national forums. The first meeting is identify what are the key elements, the key barriers to affordability and access. In each country, they will define 2 or 3 things that they can do in 2 or 3 years, or 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, and act on it. We cannot do everything, so we choose our very specific battles. So in Ghana, One was they needed the data collection. They had something about consumers and price transparency, and they had something about infrastructure sharing. So they create the working groups, they work on it, and then they make a proposal. For the consumer awareness and pricing transparency, they even finally proposed to government to lower the taxes on import of devices, and it was approved by government. They shaped the resolution on data plans, price transparency. People didn't know when they were buying data what they were buying: time, gigabytes, download, what is it, bandwidth? Is it the quantity of data? So they forced somehow the government to put a regulation to make sure that consumers knew what they were buying. And they had the government also adopt reduction on smartphones import duties. In Mozambique, they also worked on the data research on equal and access use, universal broadband access. So they created the Universal Broadband Fund, and they're right now working on the reglementation of that fund based on that coalition proposal, and a fiscal policy for the sector, and sector taxation also. In Nigeria, they're working on infrastructure sharing, spectrum, and open access. They had a very interesting win there where they were able to have the regulator issue something about sharing spectrum, because the spectrum in Nigeria had a lot of issues of a lot of spectrum that was, this is a concession of one of the companies, but was unused. So they were able to flexibilize, let's say, and have that spectrum being used by those who could provide services using that spectrum. That was one of the things. And the other one was important, was about consumers, and another one about broadband, the broadband plan also. In Dominican Republic, we were able to work in 3 years and propose a fiscal policy for the sector. We have a very heavy fiscality on ICTs in Dominican Republic. You pay 30% on anything you consume ICT, from your cable TV to your phone to your SMS to your internet. So we proposed a whole fiscal policy to change that and to still balance. I mean, because usually governments say, "Oh, don't touch my income." Usually ICTs are still the new how you say, milking cow in English. Yeah. So they don't. So you have to propose a scheme where they can still, balance their fiscal income. Otherwise they won't even talk to you. So, and that's another thing. When you do this multi-stakeholder, you don't just have the ICT person and the regulator or the ICT ministry. You have to have the Ministry of Economy. You have to have the tax person, and you have to have the budget person of the government in the room too. So often multi-stakeholders include different government agencies that usually are not agreeing on these kind of things. Infrastructure sharing, we had a very important study that we did for 1 year on infrastructure sharing. We came up with proposals, and the government acted upon it, and they issued an infrastructure sharing regulation. It's not enough for us. I think we could do a lot more. So we proposed a broadband law to change certain things in the legal framework, so we could have much more infrastructure sharing and shared backhauls and dig ones policies and things like that will lower the cost of operating and thus the final price. Social inclusion, we had issues with all the public policies in the Dominican Republic did not have specific targets for rural, poor, low income, and women. So we proposed a framework to review any ICT policy and work on including targets, but not only targets, projects, and budgets that will address specifically issues related to low income, gender, or rural urban gaps. Data collection, also we supported the renewal of what we call the PENTIC, which is the National ICT Statistics System for the country. In Guatemala, we are supporting the design of the broadband plan and the institutionalization of digital agenda. That's two things that are quite complicated in a very complicated political context, but are needed because, again, those are countries with very, very low rates of adoption, and where basically for 80% of the population, the internet is not affordable. Bangladesh and Myanmar are two other countries where we have similar activities. The lessons for this is, when you do this multi-stakeholder engagement, you are training many people who are impacted by these policies do not understand at first why they should have a view on that. So if you're working with Rural Women Empowerment Network and you're talking about spectrum, you say, but how do I eat that? I mean, why is it important to me? It is important to you. The fact that there is spectrum allocated for rural community networks will affect you, will allow you to access. So you have to have a say there, or you will be impacted by whatever come out on the spectrum policy. So you have to have a say. So you have an empowerment, a training, capacity process that you have to do, so they understand what is at stake, and they can have a position, and they can have a say, and they can support whatever comes out. So it's more than just inviting people to come to a meeting. It's really about building the capacity so they understand. The ITU guy once said, well, one ITU guy, not the ITU in general, but one ITU guy said, but spectrum goes through everybody the same. Women or men is the same thing. Spectrum goes, in the air. Oh, no, it's not the same. It's complicated. Anyway, it takes effort. As I said again, a consultant could do the same thing in much less time, but then you lose the process. And the process, it's not only when you do the thing, but it's after. For example, infrastructure sharing. When you start talking infrastructure sharing, all the telcos will say, oh, don't talk to me about that. Don't touch that. We don't want anything. Stay away. That's not your business. We share if we want. Right? Then the government will issue something, and then they will start fighting and go to court and this and that. And it takes years before something happens. But if you sit together in a room and say, okay, our interest is this, and your interest is this, and and they start discussing and understanding each other's position, and you have other actors in the room, academics, the guy from the finance ministry, the guy from there. When the thing comes out, everybody understood, okay, that's the best agreement we could have that works for everybody. So it's very different from, even if it's the same text, it's very different from when it was everyone was involved in the process than just taking it out. So implementation gets a lot easier. So it's you invest a lot of time before, but once you get that thing out, everybody know what it's about. Everybody know that's the best middle ground position for everyone, and will support at best its implementation. So that's why it's very important, this multi-stakeholder engagement model in all parts. That was it. Thank you. Please.
Again, thank you for a very stimulating presentation. Two thoughts. One is, when we think of the digital divide, we tend to focus on females. But bear in mind that you have disabilities, persons who cannot see, persons who cannot hear, and we have to move forward to recognize these persons. Universal access funds must be given to these persons,
Completely.
that they can access technology. Because what I learned recently, it is much more expensive for a person with a disability to access technology.
It is.
Because of the devices they have to buy to afford them this opportunity. And we cannot forget that and take it for granted. The other point is Jamaica is now looking at spectrum pricing, because 15 years ago, the technology has changed and there is a lot more demand for a lot more spaces in spectrum. And we do believe that there is an opportunity, not for it to look at it as what was the word you use? A milking cow, but again, enabling and developing a nation. Because too often, what is in the hands of the rich and the persons who can accept becomes the norm for them. And then you have persons who are in the forgotten group, but we have to live in the same country. And again, at the end of the day, we wonder why there is no economic growth, or the growth is not moving as fast, but we have to enable it. And it's just a point of interest to shift that mindset of getting funds in from spectrum and look at it in a different lens. How would I like my country to look in 50 years' time? And these are points I'd like to make.
Yeah, an interesting example is Chile that had, instead of selling the spectrum in the auction for the 700 the digital dividend, what they've done is they put, how do you say, not obligation is not a good word. They put contraprestaciones. Those who got the license got committed to keep connected at that bandwidth, so many schools, so many free Wi-Fi, so many hospitals, so many whatever. Sorry, condition? It's a kind, yeah. But instead of asking for so many $1 million, they said you provide free internet bandwidth at that quality for so many places. So it was not getting the money, but getting the bandwidth. For example, I mean, that's one example of what. Mm-hmm.
Right. On the topic of accessibility, for the first time in a few months ago, I had the opportunity to work with two blind computer users who wanted to do a radio station. One the CEO, the other the DJ. And so as a developer, we had for the first time, frankly, I considered them. Like some basic designs, we think as it looks good or whatever, but they're blind, so they really can't see, so it need to be accessible. And we had to redo a whole interface just so that the voice recognition application can read all the labels. And it's short, not long. And recently, we did enough work. We had to learn and implement. So now, as of yesterday, today's Thursday, yesterday for the first time, the DJ and the person reading the messages on Facebook and that kind of thing are all blind, operating a radio show. So this is the kind of thing
that's in Guyana.
No, that's in Trinidad.
In
here.
Trinidad, okay.
And it's going to happen in Guyana and I think in Bahamas at some point in following months. But the point is that even, I mean, funding was an issue because it's expensive. The software is usually expensive and it's not open. And this is my underlying drive is that a lot of these systems are not open. So if the systems are open, then it allows for a local developer or team of developers or a consortium of developers to build modules to help these persons who need to be connected. So it's just to make sure that if it's proprietary, that it allows for a level of integration and adaptability for our local market.
Indeed.
Thank you. I believe that the World Wide Web Foundation actually works on standards for what my colleague here was talking about.
It's
for
the W3C.
accessibility.
It's not the Web Foundation, it's the W3C Consortium, which is also created by Tim Berners-Lee, but it's a different organization.
Okay.
But yes,
and there is
anyway, inclusion is of course a concern.
There's also something called the Dynamic Coalition for Accessibility and Disability. If you speak to me afterwards, I can give you more information. They have links to the information you're looking for.
Yeah,
and thank you.
The issue there is always how you make sure that those specific interests and needs are heard and taken into account at when policies are made. Not just for a nice picture or a demo, but really at national, yes, exactly, as a policy to address those needs.
And we should perhaps congratulate CTU, because in the ministerial meetings yesterday, there was a blind policeman who was part of the display, and there was a man in a wheelchair who was doing software for something, and there were, I believe, also people who were deaf. So they weren't just brought in as, you have to have representation of disability. They were really there. So well done, CTU.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Oh,
Yeah.
No. You need a mic. You need a mic.
We'll give you the,
We are
we'll give you the
online.
mic. Make it short.
My apologies, we'll be
I
short.
know it's difficult.
You said, you use this, you said you use a measure and use it by country, but it really hides a lot of
Yes.
the underlying important issues. Shouldn't you change the measure?
No, we have to deepen the measure in each case. That's
Right.
what I mean. I mean, if you look at the country level indicator, sometimes you don't see the details. And you say in English, devil is in the details?
Yeah.
So,
Yes, that's right.
the devil is in the details. So, the country, we have affordability, but 80% of the population is not affordable.
Well,
because particularly in Latin America, the problem of income
Inequality.
it was so unequal in Latin America, not so much in the Caribbean, but in Latin America in particular, that a country that looks okay nationally, if you look 80%, it's not okay. So
hence you need to change the measure.
that's the point. You always have to dig a bit more.
You're taking questions, Nigel, again?
Oh, is there one?
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to explain a little bit on Trevor's thing. What we could do then is adjust the indicator to reflect the income disparity because what it means is that in some places where there's low income disparity, then there's 60% of the people who have affordable. But then there may be places where it's affordable for 20%, so the average would be cheap. But because of the income inequality, you may have, so maybe another factor that considers the distribution of income in the country so that places with high income disparity may come lower on the overall scale.
We do it when we have to do work in a specific country and policy. That we do. We also look at gender, we also look at rural, urban, etc. So any kind of criteria is good once you want to have specific, but this is because you want to have specific policy towards specific populations. So if you have a fiscal policy on ICTs, then you say, okay, but I will subsidize for those who have low income only because they need to have that. So, or subsidize the demand or the offer. So it's always like that. I mean, once you get into policy making, then that's when you really have to dig to make sure you're targeting the right populations with your policies.
It's just that if we had an indicator that put countries lower on the list because of higher income disparity, it might force them to work more closely with you to do things like that.
We do. We create surprises in our events.
All right,
Good evening.
thank you
I
very
just had
much.
one question
Next to CTU.
quickly.
Oh, wait.
Quickly.
I didn't realize.
In one of your lessons learned, you said was governments were, I just want to misquote, we're talking about a driver for that they basically will determine the acceptance of one of the success factors. And I just wanted to add, in my experience, I also saw people being the driver, specifically for Spectrum. And I would like to cite Trinidad and Tobago. When we were looking at the regulator and they were taking a bans of Spectrum, because of poor service, the citizenry started to demand a particular band of Spectrum, and that drove the government to just reconsider. So I'm just going to say, in terms of your indicators, also look, we are Caribbean people. We don't just, and that point was made, we don't just take things. We also have the empowerment to say, hey, if this doesn't work for us, we are our governments. And we also speak in a very, as I say, you had civil society, you had the public sector. So if something does not work, we can at times get vocal. I just wanted to offer that.
And to support that, consumer organizations are important to sensitize about all these ICT market product services and how consumer protection, you make consumer protection really work in the Caribbean. I mean, this is one of the areas that is a lot of work to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yacine.
Thank you.